I'm a train station attendant in Tokyo, and I recently watched an American traveler try to tip my colleague for giving directions. When we politely refused, he got visibly frustrated and insisted that Japan's economy would actually collapse without extracurricular capital flow. He literally tried to shove a $20 bill into the ticket slot. I told him it wasn't necessary, but he shouted, "I'm just trying to prevent your national recession." It was truly surreal. My brother works as a security guard at the Great Pyramid of Giza, where a tourist once demanded a refund. He claimed the lack of air conditioning inside the stone chambers was a direct violation of his basic international traveler right. When my brother explained that the structures were 4,000 years old, the man replied, "Then they've had plenty of time to install some vents." He threatened to call the embassy because the humidity was ruining his expensive leather sandals. I'm a waiter at a busy churrascaria in Sao Paulo, and an American guest once tried to order a medium well steak. I explained the traditional carving style, but he confidently stated that undercooked meat is a communist plot to weaken Western immune systems. He pulled out a pocket meat thermometer and started probing the buffet skewers while shouting about food safety standard. "I know my rights as a taxpayer," he said, as if that applied to a Brazilian barbecue. My cousin drives a shuttle bus in rural Finland, and he once had a passenger demand he turn the outdoor heaters on. The woman was convinced the beautiful northern lights were actually a massive electrical heater system the government activated for tourists. When he told her it was a natural atmospheric phenomenon, she rolled her eyes and said, "Don't lie to me, I've seen the Truman Show." She spent the rest of the ride looking for the hidden light switches. I worked the ticket counter at a historic temple in Bangkok, and a guy once showed up in neon swim trunk. I told him he needed to cover his legs to show respect for the sacred site. He laughed and said, "Buddha was a chill guy, I'm sure he appreciates the leg day I've been putting in." He claimed that freedom of fashion was a universal law that trumped local religious traditions. He eventually left, muttering about how the monks were clearly just jealous. My uncle manages a high-end recycling center in Zurich, where an American expatriate once tried to throw away a whole sofa. When told about the mandatory Zurich sack trash bag fees, he claimed the bags were a socialist scam to track his consumption habit. He insisted that because he paid taxes in Florida, he shouldn't have to pay for Swiss garbage stickers. "I'm an American citizen, my trash is essentially diplomatic mail," he shouted while dumping cushions onto the pavement. I'm a greeter at a grand mosque in Abu Dhabi, and a tourist once tried to enter while eating a hot dog. I informed him that food wasn't allowed inside the prayer hall, but he insisted it was religious fuel for his spiritual journey. He claimed his high school history teacher said mosques were actually community cafeterias during the Middle Ages. "I'm just participating in the ancient tradition of holy snacking," he said with total confidence. It was incredibly awkward. My sister is a schoolteacher in Paris who recently hosted an American parent who refused to use the "tu" form of address. The mother claimed that formal language was oppressive and that everyone in the world should just be besties to ensure global peace. When my sister explained the cultural importance of the "vous" formality, the woman said, "I'm bringing the spirit of California here, and we don't do hierarchies." She proceeded to call the elderly principal "dude" all afternoon. I was working at a traditional wedding in rural India when an American guest refused to take off his shoes. He argued that his sneakers were orthopedically sanctioned and therefore exempt from any local religious or cultural requirements. He told the priest that, "God doesn't care about my soles, he cares about my soul." He spent the entire ceremony standing on a piece of cardboard he brought himself, claiming it created a neutral sovereign territory for his Nikes. My cousin is a librarian in Oslo, and he once had a visitor get angry because nobody was making small talk. The man claimed that the Janti law was a psychological disorder that he intended to cure with his high-energy personality. He stood in the silent reading room and started clapping his hands to wake up the locals from their supposed collective depression. "You guys need a dose of American sunshine," he shouted. People just stared at him in absolute silence. I'm a bartender in Seoul, and I watched an American businessman try to pour his own drink during a formal dinner. His local hosts looked horrified, but he told them that waiting for others is a sign of low productivity. He claimed that self-service is the foundation of a true democracy, and that he was teaching them leadership skills. He ended up finishing the entire bottle of soju alone, shouting about how he was the CEO of this table. My brother works at a guest house in Santorini, where a guest once complained about the lack of modern plumbing systems. When told the pipes were narrow due to the ancient volcanic terrain, she insisted it was a calculated insult to American tourists. She claimed that gravity works differently in the US, and therefore the Greek government was clearly choosing to make the toilets slow. I shouldn't have to think about my waste this much, she yelled at the ocean. My father owns a small cafe in a Mexican village, and an American tourist once demanded he cancel the siesta. The man was upset that the local shops closed during the hottest part of the day for a break. He said, "Time is money, and you guys are literally burning cash by napping." He claimed that if the town just drank more Starbucks, they wouldn't need to sleep. He spent 2 hours pacing the empty street, looking for unlazy workers. I'm a rug merchant in Marrakesh, and a traveler once tried to reverse haggle me by demanding I lower the price further after we agreed. He said that because he was from a no-haggle state, the final price was actually just a suggestion. He claimed that market transparency required me to show him my original wholesale receipts before he'd pay. "I'm a business major," he said. "I know you're trying to fund a palace with this one rug. I just closed my shop." My cousin is a park ranger in Singapore, and she caught a tourist trying to smuggle a giant pack of chewing gum. When she informed him it was restricted, he claimed it was medical equipment for his chronic jaw alignment issues. He insisted that the US Constitution protected his right to masticate freely anywhere in the world. "You're infringing on my basic human right to minty freshness," he said. He eventually had to surrender the gum, looking deeply offended by the law. I'm a barista in Rome, and a guy once ordered a large cappuccino at 3 in the afternoon. When I mentioned that Italians usually only drink milk coffee in the morning, he got very defensive. He claimed that caffeine molecules don't have a watch, and that I was practicing beverage discrimination. He told me that his grandfather was 10% Italian, which gave him special dispensation to ignore our traditions. "Just put the foam in the cup, Luigi," he said. My brother works as a chef in Beijing, where a tourist once demanded a personal portion of every dish. He was upset by the traditional family-style rotating table, claiming that communal eating is a hygiene nightmare. He insisted that individualism is the secret to American greatness, and that sharing food was the first step toward a total loss of privacy. He ended up eating a bowl of plain white rice in the corner, far away from the other happy guests. My uncle runs a burger joint in Sydney, and an American tourist once tried to sue him over the beetroot. The man claimed that putting a purple vegetable on a burger was culinary assault and a violation of the Geneva Convention. He insisted that beets are for salads, not for the sacred American sandwich. He told my uncle that he was destroying the integrity of the West one slice at a time. He refused to pay until the beet was removed. I'm a waiter in Lima, and a guest once had a meltdown when he saw kiwi or guinea pig on the menu. He claimed that because he had a pet guinea pig named Fluffy, the restaurant was technically promoting cannibalism. He insisted that the Peruvian government should rebrand the rodent to make it more palatable for North American sensibilities. "You can't just eat a childhood memory," he cried. He eventually ordered chicken but stared at the menu with visible trauma. My cousin is a waitress in Berlin, and she once had a customer demand free tap water with ice. When she explained that Germans usually pay for bottled sparkling water, he claimed that water is a human right guaranteed by the UN. He insisted that lukewarm water is a sign of a failing state and that ice cubes were the currency of the civilized world. He spent 10 minutes explaining the thermodynamics of a properly chilled beverage while the other tables waited. I'm a bartender in London, and an American tourist once tried to tip me $50 to get better service. When I told him we get paid a fair wage and tips aren't expected like that, he looked confused. He said, "If I don't pay you extra, what's your motivation to not spit in my drink?" He claimed that tipping is the only thing keeping the world from total anarchy. He eventually left the money on the bar and ran away. My sister works at a faux shop in Hanoi, where a tourist once demanded real milk for his coffee. When told we use sweetened condensed milk, he claimed it was a dairy conspiracy to give tourists cavities. He insisted that cows in Asia are clearly being underutilized, and that he wanted to see the manager to discuss modernizing the supply chain. He told my sister that Vietnam needs a dairy revolution, and that he was the man to lead it. My brother is a waiter in Lisbon, and a guest once got angry because there was no salt on the table. He claimed that flavor autonomy was a core human freedom that the restaurant was trying to suppress. When the chef explained that the food was already perfectly seasoned, the man said, "My taste buds are the only judges I recognize." He pulled a packet of salt out of his sock and started shaking it over his expensive seafood rice. I'm a server at a traditional restaurant in Addis Ababa, and a tourist once demanded a fork for her injera. When I explained that we traditionally eat with our hands, she claimed it was primitive and a violation of her manicured dignity. She told me that the invention of the fork was the peak of human evolution, and she wouldn't devolve for a meal. She eventually used 2 credit cards like chopsticks to pick up her spicy lentils. My cousin works at a steakhouse in Buenos Aires, and a guest once sent back a perfect medium-rare ribeye. He claimed that meat shouldn't have a personality, and demanded it be cooked until it was gray and respectable. He told my cousin that blood belongs in a hospital, not on a plate. He insisted that well-done meat is the only way to ensure 100% American safety. He ended up eating what looked like a piece of charcoal with ketchup. My brother is a travel agent in Toronto, and an American client once tried to book a day trip to Vancouver. When my brother explained it was a 5-hour flight, the man laughed and said, "It's all just one big province, right?" He insisted that Canadian geography is just a marketing myth to sell more gas. He truly believed he could drive across the second largest country on Earth in an afternoon. "I've driven across Rhode Island in 20 minutes, he argued. I'm a rental car agent in Reykjavik, and I recently had a tourist try to drive a sedan across a glacier. When I told him it was illegal and dangerous, he claimed that his all-American grit was more powerful than any four-wheel drive system. He insisted that physics is just a suggestion for people with enough confidence. He told me that Icelandic roads are just a way to keep the best spots secret. He eventually got stuck in a muddy ditch. My cousin is a bicycle courier in Amsterdam, and he once saw a tourist try to walk in the middle of a bike lane. When a dozen cyclists rang their bells, the man shouted, "I'm a pedestrian, I have the right of way in every hemisphere." He claimed that bikes are just toys, and that real adults use their feet or afford. He insisted that the city should pave over the canals to make more room for SUV parking. I'm a jeepney driver in Manila, and an American passenger once tried to pay me with a complimentary voucher from a hotel in Las Vegas. When I told him I only take pesos, he said, "This is backed by the MGM Grand, it's basically global gold." He insisted that American corporate credit was a universal currency that even small-time transit workers should honor. He spent the whole ride explaining the liquidity of the hospitality industry to the confused passengers. My uncle works at the Grand Bazaar in Istanbul, and a tourist once got lost and demanded a grid-based map. When told the bazaar was built in the 15th century, he claimed the lack of right angles was a fire hazard and a psychological trap. He insisted that the Ottoman Empire clearly didn't understand urban planning. He told my uncle that he was going to write a very stern letter to the Sultan about the confusing layout of the shops. I'm a bus conductor in Nairobi, and a traveler once demanded to see the official written schedule for our matatu. When I told him we leave when the bus is full, he claimed that time-based logistics are the hallmark of a civilized society. He insisted that waiting for people is a form of soft kidnapping. He sat on the bus with a stopwatch, loudly announcing every minute that passed. "We're losing valuable GDP here, people," he shouted at the locals. My sister is a tour guide in Queenstown, and a tourist once got angry because we drive on the left side of the road. She claimed that the right side is the only side that makes biological sense for the human brain. She insisted that New Zealand is just trying to be difficult to confuse foreign investors. She told my sister that the British only invented left-side driving to slow down American progress. She refused to get into the van. My brother is a translator in Moscow, and he once had a client complain that the locals didn't smile enough. The man claimed that facial joy is a universal human requirement, and that the Russians were practicing emotional warfare. He tried to teach a group of stern-faced babushkas how to grin by showing them pictures of golden retrievers on his phone. "You guys need to embrace the power of positivity," he said. They just looked at him with icy confusion. I'm a waiter in Prague, and a tourist once tried to tip me with a handful of American nickels. When I told him I couldn't use them, he claimed that US currency is the gold standard and that I should be honored to hold a piece of the empire. He insisted that the euro is just monopoly money and that real value comes from the heart of the Midwest. He left the coins on the table like he was a king. My cousin is a hiking guide in the Chilean Andes, and a tourist once asked how close we were to the mountains. When he pointed to the massive peaks right in front of them, she said, "No, I mean the real ones from the postcards." She insisted that the National Geographic filters were missing and that the mountains looked too realistic and not scenic enough. She claimed that Chile should invest in better lighting for the mountain ranges to attract more influencers. My brother works at a wine cellar in Budapest, where a guest once refused to clink glasses during a toast. He claimed that audible glass contact was a secret signal used by 19th century spies, and he didn't want to be monitored by the state. When told it was just a local tradition, he said, "I'm an American, I don't do secret handshakes with my drinks." He spent the rest of the night drinking his wine in total silence and looking over his shoulder. I'm a locksmith in Warsaw, and an American renter once called me because he couldn't understand his apartment buzzer. He claimed that pressing a button to let someone in was a violation of his Homeland Security protocols. He insisted that the building should install a retinal scanner to bring it up to modern Texas standards. He told me that analog technology is a gateway for burglars, and that he didn't feel geopolitically safe in a building with a simple doorbell. My uncle runs a surfing camp in Costa Rica, and a tourist once got angry because the tide didn't schedule itself around his lunch. He claimed that nature should be more predictable in a tourist-heavy area. He insisted that the pura vida lifestyle is just an excuse for lazy oceans. He told my uncle that, in California, the waves have a much more professional attitude. He spent the afternoon yelling at the surf for being uncoordinated and lacking a clear mission statement. I'm a temple guard in Bali, and I recently saw a man try to meditate by sitting on top of a sacred statue. When I asked him to move, he claimed that his inner peace gave him spiritual squatting rights over any religious monument. He insisted that the universe told me this was my spot, and that local rules are just for people who aren't enlightened. He told me that Buddha is a state of mind, not a piece of stone. It was incredibly frustrating. My brother works at a high-end bar in Seoul, where an American guest once refused to let his elder pour his drink. He claimed that seniority is a myth, and that age is just a number on a birth certificate. He insisted that the youth are the future, and that he should be the one pouring for everyone to symbolize the transfer of power. He ended up offending everyone at the table while shouting about meritocracy and flipping the social pyramid over a glass of beer. It's truly fascinating how some travelers carry their homegrown assumptions across every border, convinced that their way is the only way. These stories aren't just about mistakes. They're about the hilarious, confident confusion that happens when cultures collide at high speed. Next time you travel, remember that the local norm isn't a challenge to your identity, it's just how the rest of the world works. If you've ever witnessed a confidently wrong cultural moment, I want to hear it in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more elite, cross-cultural stories that prove the world is a much weirder place than the guidebooks suggest.